Hey everyone, and welcome to Age of Reason. I'm JC, and so today I'm going to talk about Roscosmos. Roscosmos is the Russian space agency name. It's like NASA in the US or JAXA in Japan. And the reason why I picked the story for today is there are many reasons actually, but one of them is it's good to know more things. It's never you have never enough knowledge, okay? And these type of stories, they don't really, well, I'm sure Americans have no idea what's going on with the Roscosmos. So it's a good story, and it's also a cautionary tale because in Russia we have basically a dictatorship. Putin is a strongman dictator, and so he there's a lot of corruption in the country, and this happened because people let it happen. We gave him way too much power, and then guess what? He abused that power, and basically he declared himself almost a king by altering the constitution, so now he can stay in power for a very long time. And so in that very long time, people are going to keep suffering, and the money is going to keep getting stolen, like always. So why don't we start here? And so this is a Russian article, but I actually put it into Google Translate as well, so you can read the English version. I know it's not great. I could have translated it myself, but there are time issues, time constraints. So here we start with this guy, so Ilya Kharlamov. You can see that it was posted on May 31st, so it's quite recent, very recent. And he says here that the Russia is still flying on the Soyuz spacecraft. So that Soyuz was developed back in the Soviet era under Korolev. And so now we changed the country's name. We went from the Soviet Union to Russian Federation, and Putin is trying to kind of reinvent the wheel here a little bit, and he's basically saying, oh, we did that. But that's not true at all. He didn't do shit in the last 30 years. He's just taking the credit for an old program that was developed in the Soviet times. That's all. So, of course, as you can imagine, there are projects going on. There is development happening. They list a couple of names here, like Zarya or Clipper. Clipper is kind of interesting because that was the Pan Am kind of call sign. Do you remember that? The Clipper won something. There are others as well. And the big problem is one of those rockets, Zenit, for example, they mentioned here, is made in the Ukraine. And now the Ukraine, by the way, this article is written with a bit of sarcasm and stuff like that, so satire. Now that rocket is made in the Ukraine, and the Ukraine is our biggest enemy, quote unquote, so that's a problem. Obviously, they're not going to give the rockets to us. They're going to sell it, and they're going to sell it at a very high price. So this is a certificate from this author. So the author of this article, he posted his copy of the diploma here. And basically, he's an engineer. He's qualified to develop rockets. And yeah, I'm not really sure what that the other stuff means here. But the interesting thing he notes here is that his salary was about 100. So I'm not sure what that 100 means. Is that per week? Per month? I think it's per week. And he says at the same time that somebody who's cleaning the toilet in McDonald's, he was earning 250 bucks a week probably. So already you see this big difference. Engineer in Russia is not respected, and then people in Russia wonder why so many engineers go to the States. Well, this is why, because nobody wants to stay in Russia and work for starvation wages. Everybody wants to have a good life. Look, it's all about survival at the end of the day. You want to survive in the best conditions. So Russia is unable to provide these conditions. So here he mentions he's going to talk about some of the reviews of the workplaces related to rocketry. This I did not translate, so just bear with me for a second. Basically, a lot of these people, a lot of those ex-employees are saying the same thing. They're saying that the leadership is bad, they kept changing the leadership, but nothing else kept changing. So, of course, every time you got a CEO leaving, he leaves with a very fat package. Okay, and the employee gets nothing from that. That's true in the US as well. Okay, let's be honest there. But the US has more money to absorb those type of shocks. In Russia, we don't. This guy says that everything is a disaster. The leadership just comes in and yells at people. This one says there was a problem with the apartment. They had trouble getting the apartment through work, etc. There's more here. So this one says, again, so leadership kept changing. You have to wait a few months before they reply to you. And so in those few months, they don't pay you, of course. So you're basically kind of waiting for the answer. Some people said here that the social package is good here, and then other people said it's not. So I don't know which side to pick here. I'm not the judge. And this is kind of interesting. So what Russians often say is that, hey, look, we had Gagarin, the first man to space. So because we had Gagarin, we're gonna keep doing great things. And there's a bit of truth to that, but really in today's environment, it's not the same at all. So here in 2012, when the oil prices were quite high, Russia was planning to be in the top 3 nations in space, like space exploration. That's basically what it says here. But in reality, the reality is not like that at all. The reality is that by 2030, the top 5 is USA, China, European Union, Japan, and India. So all of these countries are doing something. They're innovating. They're creating new ways to go to space. They can afford it because, there's less corruption. For example, in Japan, there is corruption in Japan too, but definitely a lot less than in Russia, that's for sure. So unfortunately for Russia, they're not going to be in the top 5, but they're going to compete with nations like Brazil and Israel. I don't even know what Brazil is doing, like space-wise. I have no idea. So it must be really kind of low level, low bar. So what is the current project of Roscosmos? As you can imagine, is to waste more money and to steal more money. So one good way to do that is to go into construction. You build things. You basically what happens in Russia is that, hey, we have a project, so let's put $100 million for it, and everybody like a pack of rabid dogs just attacks that money, takes it away, and then you're left maybe with $10 in there. What can you do with $10? You can't do anything. So then these projects just get in construction. They stay in construction for years and years. Nothing happens. Then, of course, the conditions deteriorate over time, over weather. Then you have to change the material again, and it's just a disaster. It's an ongoing disaster. So here we have an image of a spaceport that they're trying to build, but I highly doubt that they're going to do it. And definitely, if they do it, it's going to be like 2 or 3 times over the budget. So here they're talking about the International Space Station. So in 2003, there was the space shuttle accident, the Columbia. And what did Roscosmos do as a response? They raised the price of a Soyuz ride from $20 million to $70 million, just overnight like that. So this is one reason why SpaceX was trying to launch people from the States, because we're trying to bring the cost down. One way to do that is by reusable rockets. So I was watching another SpaceX launch last night, and again, they managed to launch satellites into the air, and they managed to safely land a rocket. So that's 2 rockets landed in a week. That's impressive. I always root for the rocket, man. They have to land. That's so exciting to watch. So the head of Roscosmos is this guy called Rogozin, and by trade, he's a journalist, or like a press secretary at best. So basically, they say here that I won't even entrust this guy with a wrench. So yeah, again, unqualified person in a position. Not new in the US. We also have that. I mean, Betsy DeVos, who's our Minister of Education, she's absolutely unqualified for that position. So happens everywhere. But hey, that's what I'm doing here. I'm making those connections so people can connect it in their heads. So in this part, they're talking about they're just reminding that we had Gagarin, we had the space station Mir, of course. We had a space shuttle, we had a Soviet space shuttle program as well, which was not as good as the American one, nowhere near. And so here they're talking about Elon Musk. So he went to Russia to buy some old rockets. And again, they mentioned that these rockets are made in the Ukraine. So again, it's another center that was lost when the Ukraine became independent. And I think that's in one way, I think why Putin tried to get his hands back on the Ukraine, because he was seeing all these assets just kind of disappearing in front of his eyes. So instead of innovating within Russia, instead of building new things there and boosting the economy, he basically tried to invade the Ukraine. So using the easy way out, so to speak. Let's just grab it back. Let's not build anything new. Let's just grab what other people have. So the article here says that according to the official version, Elon Musk never came to Russia, but in non-official stories, he came there, but the generals that were responsible for the rockets, they wanted a much bigger share of the profits. So he said, screw that, I'm not doing that. So of course in Russia we do have very intelligent people, we have very educated people who read a lot of books, etc. So these people, what happens to them often is that they're like destroyed by the government. The government comes in and basically like puts them to jail, or starts some kind of criminal act against them or something like that. So this is what this says in a nutshell. And the bottom article here says the Russian Elon Musk died because of torture and rape inside a jail. So there you go. That's what happens to those people. So there is a lot of potential there, a lot of very intelligent people, but the government doesn't want that. The government wants full control over any achievement. So they don't like these side companies, like independent companies starting up. They don't want that. This one I saw, I'm sorry I didn't translate into Google. This basically says, talks about the salaries. So for an engineer, and this is dated the 14th of March of this year, actually, so 2020. These salaries, you can shove that number into like a currency converter right now, and you'll see that this is probably, I don't know, like $300, $400 a month. For an engineer. I mean, I understand, like, if you're some kind of street sweeper, that's your only duty. You just sweep the streets. That's probably like a fair compensation. But for an engineer, and then you wonder why people go to the States. So why do they go to the States? Because if you compare it to the SpaceX offers for engineers, okay, these are kind of top positions here, like a senior engineer, manager, and a lead engineer. So obviously these guys are making more than just engineer. But just if you go off these salaries, I don't know how much the engineers make, but probably 70, 80 grand a year. So of course that's like 10, 20, 30 times more than in Russia. The administrator of NASA's salary, official salary, is about 232,000. That's the median average compensation, or the median compensation. Whereas the head of Roscosmos makes double that money, and at least the NASA administrator has something to brag about, but this guy has nothing to brag about. There is really little to be cheering about, and he's making twice as much money. He's making that money. What I want to say is that he steals that money, of course. So here they give an example about one specific rocket, and so this particular rocket, the Americans also have the rights to develop it, and they have all the blueprints for it, but for some reason they don't develop it and they don't build any. So why is that? Well, it's because this particular rocket is very capricious. There is a very high probability of explosion. And so the Russians made the rocket booster, and then they couldn't really use it because it was too expensive to use. So they made something, and they themselves can't even use it because they don't have the budget for it. And so if for Americans this is expensive, then for Russians this is completely out of reach. And that just tells you about the whole stupidity of the situation. Here they're talking about the new spaceport. So, what happened is that Russia has a very Tsarist legacy. So what happened? We had a lot of republics like Ukraine, Georgia, Estonia, Kazakhstan was all part of the Soviet Union, and everybody was working together. But now all those countries are independent, and Russia really doesn't have a lot going for it anymore. The Baikonur space complex, for example, that's in Kazakhstan. So you can use it, but you have to pay a lot of money for that. Of course, they're going to charge you more. So for the spaceport, they were designing and thinking for about 15 years. So you can imagine that in those 15 years, a lot of money was stolen. Corruption, baby, corruption. The leaders, even here it says the leadership got premium pay, pay packages every time the CEO leaves, takes a huge package with him. It's great. Feeds a lot of people. So finally, they found a site and they built it, but there's a problem. The problem is transportation. So transportation in Russia is still very much based on the Soviet capability. So these are very narrow railroads and very narrow tunnels, and that's a problem. That's what this piece says here. We could build bigger modules, but they just don't fit through these tunnels. And if those projects were expensive for the USSR, then today they're just completely out of reach once again. Again, because the USSR at least had the cooperation of all the republics, now they don't. In comparison, here they show some images from the States. Top two are from the States. So they're transporting some kind of rocket module by the ocean and then on the highway. I'm just going to say here, it's probably the picture below is most likely a very unfair picture, because I can also go in Japan and find some kind of disastrous road like that, okay? That's not going to be some kind of... It's a bit biased, that's what I'm trying to say. They found some kind of worst road and they thought it's a good comparison. It's probably not fair, let's be honest here. But we do have a problem with transportation. And the final piece here is, so again, we see an image of a very narrow tunnel. So the problem is that we can launch modules which have a diameter of 3.9 meters. That's it. Whereas Elon Musk's rocket has a diameter of 9 meters, and the new Chinese rocket has a diameter of 10 meters. This is important. Size matters. Size matters. So the bigger the better, the bigger you can take loads into space. So unfortunately right now Russia is unable to do any of that, and so the future does not look bright. So that's it I wanted to cover for today. Again, the reason why I'm doing that is because it's a cautionary tale of what happens when you give too much power to a dictator in power who tries to rewrite history and who has a very corrupt cabinet. That the end result is going to be the same as in Russia. It just needs a bit of time to get there, but it will get there. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to cover this today. So I thank you for watching today, and I hope you have a nice weekend, and I will see you next week.